I'm Sheryl Gottschall and I'm here today with Glennys Mackay. Glennys is a clairvoyant medium. She's also a healer and she runs the Queensland UFO network in Brisbane, and she's also was also the director for MUFON in Australia for many years too. So hi Glennys, and thanks for agreeing to do the interview with us.
Well, thank you very much for coming.
I know you've had a very colourful history in regards to the spiritual churches and the UFO community here in Brisbane. But I wanted to ask you some things about your childhood. We'll sort of start at the beginning. I know when you were a child you had clairvoyant abilities, is that right?
Yes, well when I didn't know that I was any different to any other child, but when I was, well first of all I'll tell you that when I was born I came in here as a stillbirth, and Dr. Brettingham Moore in those days, hours later, breathed into my lungs and got me breathing, because I was only about 3 pounds at the time. But they didn't think I was going to live. But anyway, yeah, I have had rather a colourful childhood. When I was about, my parents had a farm, and I used to, often if there were sick animals, I used to do healing, but I didn't know. I used to hold them and cuddle them and whatever, and heal them. And when I was, from when I was small, but I used to see people. To me they were physical, but my parents wouldn't see them. I think they thought I was a bit crazy probably. But yeah, I had a normal childhood really. I was the middle child of 7 children. I had very loving and caring parents, and I was brought up, my dad was the youngest of a large family, and in those days, you know, you'd visit all the relatives on the farms, and they were all very loving and caring, but I often used to see people, and I'd give them messages.
So you're talking about deceased people?
Yes, yes, and I'd see uncles or aunts that had passed over, and I'd give messages, and it got me into a lot of trouble. And I remember sitting, because in those days you'd go to the families for lunch, and you know, in those days they had the big kitchens with the big tables, and you'd sit 10 to 20 people around, and I always remember one of my aunts was sitting opposite me, and there was a gentleman appeared behind her and told me to tell her that she was going to join him at 3:15 that afternoon. And I told her, you know, I was only about 6 or 7 I think at the time. I remember getting a slap. But anyway, what happened is in the afternoon she went down the steps, because in those days the toilets were way out the back, and as she went down the steps she had a heart attack and died. And so my Auntie Mary said to Dad, when you come up for dinner next time, you leave that kid at home, that peculiar kid, because every time she comes here somebody dies, she's a jinx. And in 4 months there were 3 relatives that had passed. And because I used to see people and talk to them, you see. And there was always arguments with a cousin, because I used to see what they called fairies, or little people, and they used to torment me about it. When you look back you think, oh, you know, children, but everything's so real.
How did you cope with that? Was there anyone in your family you could talk to about that?
Well, my mum used to tell me not to talk rubbish, or she'd say your imagination. But I used to have because where I lived, I was the only girl of that age. They're mostly all boys, and of course Mum used to dress me in overalls and gumboots and that, and I'd go off and play with them and build huts and climb trees, and because I was a real tomboy. And but this girl used to appear to come and play with me, and she was a bit taller than me, and she had white hair, and she'd tell me stories. And when I'd tell Mum, she'd say to me, you mustn't play with strangers, you mustn't talk to strangers. Not realising, because she'd appear and it wouldn't dawn on me that she didn't live anywhere around there. And she'd tell me all these amazing stories, but a lot of them was a lot of metaphors. When you look at Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs, well, the dwarfs were the little aliens that would come and take you away at night. And these are the stories that she'd tell me. So it wasn't until years later that I realised
what was going on.
Yeah, and then on once early in the winter it was, I used to go with my father, and we had a house car, and I'd go and help. I always, as soon as I heard Dad up, I'd be out of bed, and off you'd go, and he'd go up to milk the cow. And she was pretty tame. Sometimes I'd sit on her back, or he'd sit me in the fork of a tree or somewhere, wherever she was, he'd go up and milk her. And this particular morning, he'd just finished milking the cow, and I had the hurricane lamp in my hand, and he had hold of my hand, and all of a sudden he squeezed my hand, and I had to be very still and not move. And because we were standing under these wattle trees, and across the paddock over to where the porkers were, they were out on, you know, an acreage on grass, this big light came up, and as it came across the paddock, the horses and the cows and that ran into the corner where the trees were, and there for a while it hovered, and then it took off and disappeared. And I always remember him saying to me, "We better go down for breakfast, and we must never tell Mummy we saw the moon flying across the sky. It'll be our secret." And that, I think, must have been about 1948, I think it was.
So was that your first UFO sighting?
Yes, yeah. Well, the one I remember.
Yes, yes.
And because I didn't realise what it was at that age, you don't know. And so yes, I had, you know, a few unusual experiences, but mainly, you know, with healing and helping people.
Yeah. So later on, you met your husband.
George was over here. He was an All Black, and he was playing rugby for New Zealand Rugby Union. And I went with some friends, anyway, to the match. And then that night, one of them invited some of the team back to their place for a party, and that's where I met George. This was in Hobart. And then he came back he went home and then came back because he had an aunt and uncle that lived in Hobart. So he came back and spent some time, and we got together, and then he went back to New Zealand, then proposed, and I was only about 18 at the time, and went over to New Zealand. We got married by Archbishop of the Anglican Church in Willis Street, and I spent 20 years in New Zealand, and yeah, but that's where most of my experiences happened.
Yeah, so when you're in New Zealand, I remember you telling me of a sighting that you had there.
Yeah, well, it was in April 1964. My parents had come over from Tasmania, from Hobart, to spend some time. They wanted to come over and see New Zealand, so they brought my 3 younger brothers and came over for several months. And they rented a house not far, it was sort of out in the rural area, not far from where we lived, because we lived in a small town. I think it was about 21,000 population, just out of Wellington, in the Wairarapa. And this particular night, my brother that's next to me, he's about 6 years younger than me, he and I went to the pictures. And in those days, they used to have a board out the front that tells you what time interval and what time the pictures come out. And the pictures came out at 10:20. So, and we parked the car outside, so I only had a few minutes drive back down to where I had to take him home. And then my dad came out and helped me turn the car around, because on each side of the road there were the ditches. You know, in the country they have big ditches on each side of the road, so I wouldn't back the car into it. And as I was turning to leave, there was this big light over these trees over the where they were living, and I said to Dad, that's a strange light. And he said, yeah, the plane must be out. That's a light to be out late at this time of night, because not far from where we lived was an airport, and that was when Bruce Caffey used to come in, and he'd fly DC-3s. They used to do crop dusting from there. And so he turned the car and I took off, and as I was driving along, I was aware of a big spotlight, and all the sheep started standing up and running in different directions. And when I looked through the passenger window, there was this huge round craft. Well, I don't know what it was. It looked like it was 2 stories high, and it had lights around it. And I got quite frightened, and I had a little Morris 10, so I had my foot planted on the floor. I think I might have been doing about 60 mile an hour then. And as I went back into the South Road where we lived, as I went round the corner, it went over the top of me, and it was just above the chimney tops of the houses. And I was so busy watching that I finished up on the footpath, and I was heading towards a power pole, and I don't remember another thing until I drove into the driveway. And when I looked in the rear vision mirror, it was stationary over the houses. And it was quite large because it took up the size of two, well, most of the blocks of land then were about a quarter acre, so it was over 2 houses. I was so frightened, I didn't know whether to go in the back door or go in the front door, so I finished up grabbing the keys, going up on the patio and running in the front door. Then I ran in the bedroom and I woke George. I said, quick, quick, I've been followed home by a UFO. As I opened the Venetian blinds, and he looked at the clock and he said, it's 10 to 12. Where in the hell have you been? Have you been drinking? And I said, no, quick, get out of bed and have a look. So as he got out of bed, it took off, and like we had big double glass doors on one side of our room out onto a patio. And within seconds it was right across the Tararua Ranges. Anyway, the next morning on the news, it was sighted, they reported that it was sighted from Invercargill in the South Island right to the very top of Kaitaia in the North Island. And that was between 9 o'clock and midnight. And they're asking people to come forward, to anyone that witnessed it. And I thought, there's no way I'm going to go and tell anybody. But after that I had some very strange experiences.
Tell us about that.
I used to be woken up by, because we'd go to bed early because we were working and that, and about 11 o'clock I'd get woken up by this light that would come through the bedroom, and I'd get up and I'd open the blinds, and it was like I was communicating with someone. This light would sort of penetrate my forehead. This is how I felt, and I'd be communicating with people. And that would go on, and then I'd always go back to bed at 2 in the morning. And that went on for a long, long time. But then I had other weird experiences, like I couldn't walk past the TV, it would start going stuttery, and it would roll, and the radio, I couldn't touch things, I'd get shocks even off the handles of or even of the taps, and and then when I was working as way back then, I was a personnel officer for a big company. There was a subsidiary of ITT of America, and we used to do the wiring harness componentry for General Motors and battery chargers and the POBXs for the telephones. And it was terrible because I'd be sitting there and I'd be picking up people's thoughts. And then I'd start typing letters, and my boss would say, oh, did I give that to you? I couldn't remember, but I'd be picking up what he was thinking and what he was going to write, and I'd write it. Oh, I'll tell you what, I had a terrible time. I thought I was going crazy.
That's interesting, because you had that sighting and you had missing time that your husband said, where are you? And then you had developed electrical sensitivity, and then you were picking up on other people's thoughts and everything. Did that increase after you had that exciting?
I think it did, even though I had. But when I look back, it wasn't until I had Bud Hopkins staying here, and he did regression therapy with me, and he actually took me back to that time. And what had happened was they must have stopped the car before it hit the power pole, and then I had these 2 ugly looking faces looking into the car, and I said, under hypnosis, I said, oh my God, what ugly fingers you've got, and don't you smell? You smell like rotten egg juice. I said, you smell and you're ugly. What ugly long fingers. So they must have come and taken me out of the car, and then I could describe what was on the craft, and the console, and how, and also they explained over the years, I'm not sure how many times I'd been on those craft, but they explained to me how thought transference and how sensitised and these console things. It was just really interesting. And
with the communications that you were having, where you said you'd go back to bed at 2, whatever in the morning, what were those communications?
Well, they'd be talking to me about, a lot of it was scientific, I think, but a lot of it also they told me that I'd eventually go back across to Tasman and I'd be teaching. And they also told me then, I'm not sure, over a period of time, that I'd return to here, to Queensland, where this was the spiritual centre of Australia, and they would be helping me. But yeah, but they used to tell me things about things that had happened.
So were you guided in your life by this, do you think?
Well, you know, you have to look and see what is spirit and these people, because they are multidimensional. And I just found that I wasn't fearful or frightened, because I felt they were here to help mankind, but I always got the impression that they originally put us here. And they pick out people and they keep coming back and checking on us in our life. But I also feel that my father had obviously had encounters, because he'd disappear, and he was used to make jokes about UFOs, but I knew that he was very sensitive and very gifted. He was a very loving man. And
so he had experiences
I
with
feel that he
UFOs.
had, but he never talked about it. But
Oh,
I
I
always
see.
got that impression years later when I look back.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, he was a very spiritual person.
Now, I know that you also had some near-death experiences. So, would you like to tell us a bit about that?
Well, I think the first one was at Blackman's Bay when I was about 18 months old, but I don't remember that. They managed to drag me out of the water. But the one that was so vivid and what had happened was when I was 15, and there was a regatta on at Sandy Bay in Hobart, and I was down there, and I went round with family and my older sister and her husband, and I was out swimming, and they had a barge sort of halfway out, and because I wasn't a very good swimmer, and I'd go out and you'd lay there and sunbake, and then I'd jump in the water and swim back. And as I was trying to come back, because it was a bit out of my depth, the next thing I felt someone with their hands around my throat holding me under. And at first I thought it was my brother-in-law acting the fool, you know, being silly. And I tried to come up, and then this person just got tighter and tighter around my throat and held me under, and I couldn't get up. And I could feel my lungs and everything filling up with water. And I felt I was going to die, and that's the thing that went through my mind, I'm going to die. And next thing, it was like I had an almighty explosion in my head, and everything went totally still. It went totally still, everything was still. And then I felt I was floating. It was like I was moving towards a light. I wouldn't say it was a tunnel, but it was like, I don't think there's anything that can describe the colours or the feeling, but it was so peaceful. It was just the most peaceful thing I'd ever experienced. And so as I moved towards it, I could see a white figure. I saw a white light, and as I got near it, I was curious. I wanted to know who it was. But as I got closer, a voice in my head said, "You've got to go back. You're not ready to come here yet." And I came to, and the police, and there was ambulance and that on the beach. But apparently this man was mentally unstable, and he'd been going around holding people under the water, and he'd done it to another girl, and obviously they rang the police, and they had the ambulance there for her, and I was just very lucky that they were there. And because when I came to, all I could taste was sand in my mouth.
Did you notice any change in your abilities after that as well?
Oh, look, I always knew things, but I learnt to keep my mouth shut and not talk about it, especially when I was at school, because sometimes you'd be out playing and the kids would get up on the jungle bars, you know, and I remember saying to this young boy, "You better get down off there because you're going to fall and break your arm." And he did fall, and then he told the teacher that I made him do it, and I got into trouble. So anything happened, it was Glennys's fault, because so I learned after a long while not to say anything.
So what was your third near-death experience?
That was, oh, well, no, I've had a couple since then. I had, one night here, I was just after midnight when I had a heart problem. I must have had a heart attack, and I went out of my body, and there was no walls, nothing, but the colours are indescribable. And then I thought, I wonder if Georgia knows that I've had a heart attack. But as soon as I thought about that, I was back into the room. I mean, so the bedroom was in total darkness. And he stumbled out of bed and he's saying, "Where's the light? Where's your light?" Because I think he was half asleep. And I remember seeing him bouncing off the built-in wardrobe as he was trying to find the light. And I thought, I better go back and tell him. And I don't remember until I woke up in hospital.
Oh.
And it was like a life force came back into my body. And I got the impression, I don't know whether it did happen, but I got the impression that my legs went up in the air and my hands went. It was just like a force came back into my body. And that was in St Andrew's Hospital. And I said to the doctors, I was in intensive care, and he said he was going to be off for the next day, but some other doctor was going to see to me. And I said, "Oh, well, I'm going home." He said, "No, you can't go home." I said, "Yes, I know what happened, so I'm going home now." So I had an argument and signed myself out and came home after a day or two. And then the last one was when I had my open heart surgery 7 years ago.
What happened then?
Well, I had my open heart surgery in the morning early. They took me to the theatre at 7. I had triple bypass and valve repair. And something must have gone wrong because they rang George and said that they were having it late that night. They were taking me back to theatre and they didn't think I'd live. And they were just preparing him. So they took me back. But I always remember hearing this man, tall man, it must have been a doctor, that was dressed. He looked like he'd been going out somewhere, and he was saying to this other doctor, "How in the hell did you let this happen? Get this woman back to theatre straight away." And I was hovering around the theatre for a while listening to them, and then all of a sudden it was like a suction took me away. And then I was in the spirit world again. But this time it seemed like there were hundreds of people there and they had their arms crossed and I couldn't get through. And yeah, so it was quite interesting. So I spent a bit of time there, and then I came back. But I remember when I did come back, I heard them saying, "We've got to get our lungs working. We have to get our lungs working, the heart." So, but it was just indescribable. But the thing is, you do learn that the past, the present, and future are all one. You have this knowingness. You know what's going to happen. You know what's here and what's past and how it all relates. You know, it's indescribable. I have no fear of death whatsoever because it's the most beautiful feeling when you go into that spirit world, and the beauty and the peace is just so overwhelming. And you have this knowingness, you know. It's just incredible. It's very hard to describe it. I guess a lot of people have written books about it and that, but I think everybody's different. But I just found that it was just amazing. But the thing is, I think too, because they have you on so much medication, I frightened a lot of the doctors and the nurses when I came out because I didn't realise that I was giving them readings. And there was one doctor, she was pregnant, and I didn't know it, but I saw this man standing behind her, and he said his name was David. And I said to her, "Oh, you're having a little boy?" And she said, "Oh, I don't know." And I said, "You're worried about him because you don't think his health's going to be right. You're worried because they told you it could be a spina bifida child." And she just about freaked. And I said, "David," but I said, "He's going to be all right." I said, "David, he's standing beside you." I said, "Is that your father?" And she said, "But he's dead." And I said, "I know, but he's standing and he's told me to tell you not to worry. The baby's going to be healthy and he's going to be a pianist like him." She said, "My father was a good pianist." So that freaked her. But anyway, I learned afterwards, months later, one of the nurses told me they used to toss a coin to see who was going to come and treat me, who was going to see me.
Who could have a go?
Because I used to tell him things. And then when one doctor came around one morning with all these, he has all these apprentices with him, I said to him, "Now tell me the truth. How long have I got before I fall off my perch?" and all these young doctors are trying to stop laughing. And I said, "That means," he said, "Oh, you've got at least good 18 years. And I said, "Well, is that how long I've got before I come back and haunt you?" So it used to be quite hilarious. But you do have you can't take life serious. You've got to have a sense of humour in life. you know, you've got to distinguish sometimes between whether you're there physically or whether you're there on the astral plane. I know I was there physically, but I've had other experiences where I wasn't sure whether I'd been dreaming or, you know, whether it happened or not.
Yes.
But I have definitely had physical experiences. And like when I've run meditation classes, they've often come through and given us information. You know, like they told us when the date and time the Berlin Wall would come down. They told us about a train crash in Germany in a tunnel. They told us about different times that things were happening around the world. Yeah, so, you know, and they're pretty accurate. But I always used to say to them, well, look, it's all very well coming through and communicating with us like this, but I want to see you in the physical and I want proof. I want proof that you exist. And so they'd give us dates, times and locations for us to go out and see them. And that's what they've done over a period of years.
Well, I was going to ask you, as a clairvoyant medium, you contact many different, I guess you have contact with beings in other realms, and you've got to differentiate, or be able to differentiate, who you're communicating with.
Exactly.
How do you know which ones are extraterrestrial?
Well, by the information and knowledge they get. You see, just because we pass over doesn't say that we become a scientist or Albert Einstein or anything, because what type of physical life we've lived here on this earth, we don't become a scientist overnight. We have to go through different levels of consciousness, and it's like asking someone that comes through that might have been a baker or a butcher scientific knowledge. Well, they don't have that scientific knowledge. Even though you're aware and you know a lot when you go through all the different levels of consciousness when you pass over, when your etheric leaves. Look, I've had some wonderful experiences. I've had Harry Edwards, who was a famous healer, has come through many times through our circle and give us knowledge and information. I've had Edgar Casey came through one night. We had a gentleman here we were doing healing on, and he came through and asked him if he wanted to stay in the physical or did he want a new body. And you know, we've had different people, but we've had quite a few come from our outer world peoples, I call them, off-world. We had some people come through and give us information, and I said to them, where exactly are you from? And they gave us some strange name of a planet. And I said, where's that? And they said they're in the same orbital as the Earth, but on the other side of the Sun. And as scientists develop and go further out into space, they'll find us. And our planet is exactly the same as the Earth. And they've conquered time and space. So anyway, I picked up this Russian astronaut, and I was telling him, and he laughed and he said, oh yeah, we've known about them for a long time.
Oh, really? Like yourself, many people who have close encounters, like you, also have other psychic abilities, like yourself, develop clairvoyant abilities, etc. Why do you think that happens?
Well, they say there's many are calling but few are chosen, I guess. But I guess I came into this world with those abilities, and they just developed more. I think probably because I've always been a very spiritual person, and probably having death experiences and that. But you see, I believe that you couldn't go and hang your shingle out and say that you're a healer unless you've got some qualifications, and that's why I studied for many years and became an osteopath and herbalist and did Bowen, anything Feldenkrais, anything to do with healing, because I originally wanted to be a doctor, but because of health issues I had rheumatic fever a couple of times when I was young, so I decided to study alternative. And so by doing that, I was able to use my gifts and skills to help people.
Do you think there is a connection between people who have those sorts of abilities, your clairvoyance, precognition, psychic abilities, and also have close encounters. Do you think there's a connection there?
I really do think so, because you'll find a lot of people that had. Look at Dolores Cannon. She's an example of communication there too, isn't she? But there's many people that have got those gifts and abilities, and you'll find when you check, you'll find that they have had encounters with off-world people. And you know, I've been with scientists, and you see, I spent 12 years working in Hawaii too, and I had encounters, many encounters over there in Brazil, and different parts of America. And it's like as though they must be following me around sometimes in New Zealand and parts of Queensland.
Well, I'm also interested in the connection between people who have close encounters and also have near-death experiences, and you're a perfect example of that. Do you think somehow that your experiences change who you are, and therefore you become more open to communication with them, or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think, you know, knowledge is power, and I think fear is created through ignorance. When you open your mind, I always tell people that mind's like a parachute, it functions best when it's open. But I just find that I've never had any fear, and I know they're there, and I've always felt totally protected, but I do think there is a connection because your mind's so open and your awareness, and like, you know, because we have those gifts that you can actually see people. Sometimes I see them as ghostly, other times I see them physically. And I think it depends on those souls, how advanced they are too, as to whether you communicate and what level. But I always say, you know, when I do teaching and I've been working, I always say to people, you've got to work from the heart centre and open yourself up, you know, because it's all about unconditional love and knowing that those people, they're here, I think they're more concerned about what the forces of darkness are doing to our planet, to our world. And that's why they're concerned, because they don't want to see us to destroy this planet. And because man is so stupid with all his, a lot of the technology is dangerous when it gets into the wrong hands. And I think they're basically very concerned of what they're doing now and destroying us.
When you met Whitley Strieber, I watched a documentary where he was speaking about that and how he was blown away by how you told him about one of his childhood friends who was deceased, and how he used to play a violin, and you picked up on everything about his friend and he just couldn't believe it. Do you remember that story?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I picked up with Anne too. She had a shocking childhood too, and I remember I cried because I do get emotional, and yeah, I was really upset about what she went through. And but we'd go out, they'd take us out, and they're looking for a parking lot. No, I blew them away one day. We went out to this, where this art gallery was, and we're driving around, and I said, now if you go up on the next level, just around the bend, just around the corner, there's a park you can have. So sure as eggs, there it was. And I think they blew them away too. But I went with, he took me down to meet Professor Gary Schwartz. And we had some amazing experiences. And Lynn Kataya, who was from Phoenix, she's a doctor and her husband a doctor, and they've got a son that's a medical doctor. And she was the one that filmed that huge craft over Phoenix. It was about a mile across. And when we went down, we went out for lunch, and then he invited me back to do some research at the university. I think they wanted to test to see what my abilities were. Well, when I was getting dressed that morning, I dressed in autumn tones, and then a voice said to me, no, don't do that. So I went back and changed, and I put this bright yellow blouse and a sleeveless yellow top and black slacks on. And when I got there, and I instantly knew what the questions I were going to ask and what was going to happen, but I thought, no, I won't say and burst his bubble, I'll just keep it to myself. And he said, well, they put me in this room and they connected up all these wires and different things. And then they had, the room was divided off, and they said, no, I want you to tune in. There's somebody that's in the room here. I want you to see what you can pick up about them. And instantly I just got yellow and black. My logic mind said, oh, I'm dressed in a yellow blouse and black slacks. But anyway, it's all right. So I picked up, the lady was involved in filming. She was going within a week to Italy. She had a photo of 3 men in her handbag, and I picked up quite a bit of stuff about her. It was Lynn Kataya, and she was dressed identical to me.
Oh, really?
And we've got photos
Yes.
of us taken. Couldn't believe it, and I just laughed, and I said, you know, I started off in autumn tones and I was told to change. And there she is, she's dressed identical.
Interestingly about Whitley Strieber, I've been reading his journal recently, and he seems to be very convinced that there is a connection between the extraterrestrials who are, you know, doing the close encounters or the visitations, etc., and the human soul. So what do you think? What do you think of that? That there might be a connection with that? Because I also remember with Kelly Cahill in her book, she wrote about her experiences where she and her husband saw this large craft, and the beings came down, and the feeling that she had was they've come to steal her soul. Did you ever have? Do you relate to any of that, or do you think there's a connection between?
Look. Yes, there's a connection, because we are a soul with a body, not a body with a soul. And we're here to grow spiritually. No one can steal your soul. I think people get carried away sometimes. But yes, they have a soul. But I also feel that I can't say for everyone, because I can only give you share with my knowledge and my encounters. But I feel that they look, you know, the ones that I've had connections with are very much, they look just like us, and there's probably thousands of them walking around this earth. The only thing is their skin is more translucent. It's like they've never been out in the sun. Whether they all wear wigs, I don't know. But very tall woman. She was about 7 foot tall. She was over 7 foot. Her legs came up, tops of her legs came up to my shoulders, and I'm from here to the window away, and I'm running beside her, and this is about 20 to 12 at night, and I'm saying to her, did you come from the house up on the hill? Because earlier in the night we were doing filming, and because down in this area there'd been 2 of the worst crimes that ever committed, and they virtually took me down to see what I could pick up about it. And it was interesting because there was a cloud formation over to the top of us to our right, and it was like a red glow, and my logic mind saying reflection from lights, you know. But anyway, we were right parked near the Manoa Valley cemetery, Chinese cemetery, and there's a road that goes up through the centre of it. But earlier in the night we looked up, and it looked like there was a house right up on the hill. Looks like people walking around. I said, oh, it must be a 2-story house, and they're getting ready for bed. Never thought any more about it until this lady came down, walked down through the cemetery, came out through the archway onto the road, and I'm running beside her and saying, did you come from that house up on the hill? And she looked down and smiled, and she said, that's not a house. And so I didn't know whether to keep talking, and I was talking to her, but she looked and kept smiling at me. When we got up the top of the hill, there's a sheer drop down into the valley, and there's trees. But when we looked and there's a roundabout where you can turn the car around. When we looked at the top, to our right, there's this huge craft, and it was like as though it was camouflaged by a cloud formation. So then we turned around and gave chase, but the lady disappeared. So, and the next day they had it in the papers. One of them must have told the news media.
So what does she look like?
She looked very attractive. She was, she had long black curly hair. So whether it was a wig, I don't know. She was dressed in a white tunic, and her boots came right up to just below her knees. She had like a tunic on, and her skin was a little bit darker than the white tunic she had on, and she looked quite attractive.
Does she look human?
Yeah, very human. When our youngest daughter was about 2.5, I got very sick and I started losing my voice. And I had tests done and they found I had cancer of larynx and larynx and that. And so I was being treated. The night before I had a dream, or to me it was a dream, and this person came to me and told me if I went into hospital I wouldn't come out, that they had work for me to do and I had to go back across the Tasman and I'd be working and doing healing over there. So I woke up the next morning and I thought to myself, my God, I'm not going to die. That's the first thing I said. So that was the most positive thing I'd said, because I'd had no voice and I was very sick for weeks and months. And I think what you do, it's like a death sentence when someone turns around and says you have cancer. And I'm thinking I'm not going to be here to see my children grow up. And then I was cursing God, why me, you know. You go through all these stages. And then I woke up and thought, wow, I'm not going to die. Anyway, I was guided, and my mother-in-law, she was from Scotland originally, she was coming with me. Anyway, I got in the car and it was like a force. It was interesting. It was like a force had taken over driving on my car. And instead of turning right and going over to Palmerston, I went heading down towards Wellington and to Greytown. And my mother-in-law thought I was crazy. She didn't know what I was doing. I eventually turned right and I went out in the countryside a bit. And then I drove up this long driveway. And it's rather interesting because still to this day I can still remember hearing the gravel under the tyres of the car as I drove up that drive. And there was a farmhouse and it had an extension built on the side of it. So I pulled up alongside the door at the side of this building, and I got out, knocked at the door, and this very tall gentleman, he looked a little Indian, like an Indian. He had dark features, reasonably dark features. And he said, come in, I've been expecting you. So, and he said to my mother-in-law, no, you come and sit down here and there's some books there. And he took me in this room and it was just, this peace came over me. And there were a lot of people sitting in chairs, some were lying on a couch. And they had these big glass windows, I always remember that, and told me to sit down in the chair. And then he walked away and started talking to everybody. And it was quite incredible because there were people there. There was a politician from Otaki who had cancer. There was a lady that the family had taken the tubes and everything out. She had final stages of cancer. They took her out of the hospital and had her down there. And there was a lady lying on the couch. And I remember him saying to her, how are you feeling now, dear? And she said, I feel good. He said, have you got your hearing aids in? And she said, no, I've got them in my hand. And he said, oh. She said, oh my God. She said, I've been totally deaf since I was the age of 8. And she was 48, I think she was. And all of a sudden she could hear. But then he came and stood in front of me and he said, right, well the cancer's spread and it's in your lungs. And he said, and part of your spine. He said, if you do exactly what you're told, he said, you'll have your voice back within 8 days. And he said, you'll be clear of cancer if you do exactly what you're told. And he said, and by the way, he said, you know who sent you here? And I thought, what does he mean by that? And he said, you've been having what you call encounters and communication with what you call UFOs since you're a little girl. And I went, oh, and I pushed back in the chair and I thought, oh my God, how does he know this? And he said, when you leave here today, he said, you'll see 2 of them over the top of this house. And at 10, he said, about 10 past 12 we'd see them. Well, when I went out at 10 past 12, there were 2. It was a clear blue sky, and there were 2. One was over the top, one was here, and one was there. And they weren't that far up. You could see so clear. And that was the first time my mother-in-law had actually seen a UFO. And I had my voice back within 6 days. Went back to the specialist, and within the month, and I had more tests and found that I had no cancer.
So do you think he was an extraterrestrial?
I wouldn't be surprised.
And what did the UFOs look like?
Just round discs in the sky like I've seen before. I'm not sure how far up, but they seemed reasonably close because you could see the underneath of them quite clearly, and one was a bit further up. So yes, he more than likely, and it was interesting because I went back to see him twice, and then after that there were people looking for him or whatever, and he was no longer there after a few months. So I don't know. I was just so overjoyed at the fact
you didn't have cancer.
I didn't have cancer.
Yes, yeah.
So it was just quite incredible. Anyway, this man was going into a deep trance. And so one of the women there, I think she was a nurse, she grabbed a book and started waving in front of me because he thought he was going to faint. And I said to her, no, 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 he's going. I said, don't you understand? I said, have you checked his pulse? And the doctor said, oh, I didn't think about that. And I said, well, you can't have third eye by putting acupuncture needles in there. Anyway, it was quite priceless because there was quite a few things happened there. But anyway, when we got back here, we were sitting discussing the whole episode of this strange afternoon, and all of a sudden I got this message that we had to go. I got longitude, latitude and dates and time, and that they would show themselves. So a friend was here as well. But what was interesting, when they gave me this longitude and map whatever, the map 19, etc., I had an old Reader's Digest book of maps, but it didn't say page, it says map. And when I opened a map 19, it was a Queensland. It gave me all this information. They'd show themselves on this particular date, and they said when the big hand was on 9 and the little one was on 11. That's how they go. So it'd be 5 to 9 on the 13th of, it must have been April. Well, it was around Easter. It was just before Easter, right? And what happened was we decided we hadn't been up that way and we'd go up there. So I rang a friend that lived up that way. It took me nearly 2 days to make contact with her. And on the Wednesday, she finally answered the phone, and I said to her, guess what? And she said, oh, I was going to ring you. And I said, why were you going to ring me? She said, because your friends are very active up here. And I said, really? She said, we've been seeing UFO craft in and out round here. So I said, well, that's why we're coming up. We've been given a message that we've got to come up. They're going to show themselves. So we went up. I looked to my right, and there's this vision that I got of this mountain. And I just about fell out of the car. And I stopped, and he said, what's wrong? I said, what's the name of that place? And he said, oh, that's Mount Inkerman. I said, oh, God, how do I get up there? And he looked at me strange. He said, well, I said, look, I need to get up there. How am I going to get up there? So on the Monday night, there were 7 of us crammed into this 4-wheel drive vehicle, and up we go up the hill. And then it's pretty rough to get to the top. But right at the top, there's a concrete slab with a railing round it, like a lookout. And so we got up there, and during the time we were there, we looked down, and there was all these bright lights down in the sugarcane. These lights came up out of the sugarcane field, and as they came towards us, they were radiating this light, and then they had this blue, like a blue light, and they flew over, 3 of them flew over us, and then another 2 came up, and then another one, and they flew over the top of us. This one came up, hovered in front of us, and then flew over the top of us. And anyway, the following night, I must have gone into a trance. I sat during the day, and this voice came through me and said to the group, his name was Andromedina Rex from the Ashtar Command. And he was showing us what capabilities they had, what they could do. They hadn't actually come into our atmosphere, but they created that as holograms. And they said that if they had come close, it could be danger to us because the green ray of light can cause us physical damage to our body. Right? And so, but I'd never heard of anybody, Ashtar Command, from the Andromedina Rex from Ashtar Command. Never heard of anybody like that before. That was strange.
Yes.
And so yeah, so it was quite. So basically, they hadn't actually come into our atmosphere, but they created it and flew over the top.
So you were seeing holograms.
Well, that's well, they created it.
Yeah, yeah.
So it wasn't actually the physical craft,
Yes.
and that's what they do sometimes. So they're not actually physical as such.
Yes.
But we see them as...
Yes, as that, yeah.
It's a jeep, like an army jeep.
Mm-hmm.
And there were two people in it dressed in camouflage gear. And they were extremely tall. One was male, one was female. In fact, they were sort of slightly stooped because their heads almost touched the roof of the jeep. And they went slowly past us. And I said to Ken, "It's the army must be up here doing manoeuvres." He said, "Well, I've come this way before and I've never seen them." Within seconds, they were back facing us. But what was interesting, if they'd turned around, they should have been facing that way. But all of a sudden, they're facing the same way as we're going. And they both looked at us in unison and they said, "Can we be of service to you?" And he said, "Oh no, we've just stopped to have a drink. We were having a drink of water and then we're off to Atherton Towquins." And they looked and smiled, and I looked at her and I thought, "Are you the ones that I'm meant to be seeing?" And she looked and nodded, and I mentally said, "Well, I'm going to walk around the back of this trailer. I want to come and touch you." So as I started to walk around the back of the trailer where we were towing, and I walked close, I wanted to get close to her to touch her, everything went totally still. Everything went totally still. Bush noises, everything. Next thing I know, we're getting in the car and following them. And there was a slight incline, and as we went up, they were just in front of us and they disappeared. So we spent the next couple of hours driving in silence, looking everywhere. And when we got up into Atherton Tablelands, I forget the first place we went in, and our George had a watch, it was a wind-up watch, and I think ours were, battery. We put the radio on, and all our watches were 20 minutes slow. We'd lost 20 minutes. In 1999 we were invited to the World Congress in Brasilia, and as a speaker to represent Australia. And it was held at the Legion of Goodwill. At the time I didn't know, but the Rockefeller Foundation exactly had paid for it. So we had 2 weeks at this very expensive hotel, all our meals and everything. Anyway, I heard about the Valley of the Sun, and I said to some of the group, "I'd love to go down. How many of you are interested in going down?" Well, there was Graham Birdsall and Colin, I've forgotten the names. Andrews and his wife. And then there was a Frenchman. There was one from Italy that came with us, and another, I can't remember their names, from Chile. And who else? Oh, that's right, and Barry Shamish from Israel. And we went down, and it was quite interesting because when you went in, they had this big archway with the sun, and they had all these, there was an area with a cover over the top, but these seats where they obviously had meditation. And when we got there, there were security dogs, and Graham Birdsall was quite a big man, and he got out, and I'll never forget, he looked at these dogs and he said, "Now you sit down and behave yourself," because we're in Brazil where they speak Portuguese. So these dogs sat down and wagged their tails, and we went up and patted them. I'll never forget that. Anyway, these men came to welcome us. We had an interpreter with us that came from the Legion of Goodwill, and but some of them could speak English, and we had Michael Lindemann as well. Michael wanted to ask all the questions and that. Anyway, there were people coming down in robes. There were women dressed in robes, and there was a spiritual area there they went into. And but the reason why we went there, well, we heard that the craft come in and land there, and then they get acclimatised, and they spend time there. But some of these people that were running this place were ex-military people. So what happened was there were people coming out, and they had the Star of David around their neck, and Barry thought at first it was a Nazi symbol, and he was getting a little aggro, and I said no, it wasn't. Well, how come they had all these things that look Jewish, So probably for hundreds of years earlier, people had migrated there, Anyway, we were invited to go into where they were having their healing and meditation, and it was interesting because they had this big holograph thing there. It was, anyway, I remember Michael wanted to film, and they said no, you can't take any photos here. But they turned to me and said, "But you can, because you're one of us." Oh wow! But there were people. There were probably would be about 50 or 60 people in this place. But but the thing was, I asked afterwards, how many of them were Earthlings and how many were aliens?
And?
And? Well, we all went away believing, yeah, well, some of them were. But Michael was busy asking questions, and I tried to explain to him about spiritual things and that. And one of them looked at me telepathically and said, "It's okay. He's just he's only young. He's a young soul, and he doesn't understand."
So, what made you ask that question? What made you ask that question?
Well, the questions I asked.
That question, like how many of them are aliens and how many aren't?
Well, I didn't actually ask it, but I knew that they were, and I said to the others, "Well, how many did you think that weren't?"
Weren't
and the conversation as we left by bus.
Yes.
But you know, it was a very interesting place, and it had this beautiful energy. You know, it was very spiritual. So that was, you know, another one of those experiences that we had. But I also was very privileged to see some of the footage that the Russians had taken when they were on the Mir of the craft that was docked there.
Yes.
And there was about 14 of these craft around, and that was when the Russian, the French, I think, and British were on that Mir.
Okay.
And then also we showed some footage. In fact, I had my camera going at the time at the conference to take photos of them, but I don't know what's happened to my. It's disappeared. They're probably among my stuff somewhere. But there was a footage of a craft that had landed in Russia. There was quite a few different ones, and they were retrieving it, and that's what he showed us. Yeah.
So how did you come to see the footage of the craft on the Mir space station?
Because this Russian astronaut showed it to us.
Oh, I see. Right.
They
and what did you see? What was on the film?
Well, it just showed you the craft around the Mir, but it also showed you the soldiers and that going into the bush into the forest where this craft had landed.
Okay.
And they showed you them talking to these tall people. He didn't give a lot of information, but he showed us the footage of where they've had, as he said, they've had probably more encounters and more advanced than what the Americans were.
Right.
I suppose there's competition among all these different countries.
So in your opinion, with all the experiences you've had, why do you think extraterrestrials are here? Why do they show themselves to some people and not to others? What's going on?
I think probably we're more aware, and I think too people become more spiritual. They don't show themselves to material. If you can just imagine a craft landing in Queen Street, what would be the first things they'd do? They'd all grab guns and start shooting, wouldn't they? And I think they virtually show to people that have awareness and that are probably more spiritual and have a better understanding, and well, you know, one friend of mine said, "Oh, maybe they put us here in the first place." And I said, "Well, that could have been probably a lot of generations again, or thousands of years ago, because you only have to see some of the markings on even the rocks out in Wilpena Pound and South Australia and you know, around the world, and even some of the Christian folk pictures, they show craft. So they've probably been coming here for thousands of years. But I think they're very far advanced as far as their technology and that goes. In fact, I believe our technology is far advanced to what they're letting people know.
Why do you think you particularly have had these close encounters? Do you think there's any particular reason?
No, I think I'm just acceptance of what happens.
Mm-hmm.
Don't know. I think probably because I've been a teacher to teach people spirituality and to help them grow. And they've helped me in healing, and I've had some most amazing experiences when I've had materialisation, people materialised, and I don't know, maybe it's something I've brought back from another life, or one of the most important things in all this work is you've got to keep your family on the ground, not let your ego get out of control. Keep life simple. And I have an acceptance, but I get very sad when I see around the world all these wars and the ignorance and the fear and the destruction of what goes on. And I believe that, we all have free will. They don't interfere because of our free will. And, I had Giorgio Bongivone stay here when he lectured. And his message was that he had to let the world know, and the powers that be, that God just didn't create the earth, he created the universes. And there are other many souls and many people live out in all the different universes. And we all have to learn to get along. So it's just, I don't know why they picked me. But I think too, with all the death experiences and the illnesses I've had, I was crippled up with arthritis, I've had heart problems, all these things, and I think what it is, you have these experiences because you can have humility and understanding when people come to be treated and healed. You have the empathy to be able to help them, so I think that's one of the reasons that I've had all those experiences. And I thank God too that maybe I've just been lucky, I've been gifted, and I thank God for that. And I always pray every night that I become a better person by it, So it's just, one of those things. But as I say, we're not the only ones in the universe.
Well, thank you, Glennys.
That's
very
all right.
interesting. And
I will get round to writing my book one day. I have so many. In fact, one stage, Collins has wanted to send a ghostwriter up to write my stories. But I probably, if I'm sitting around the table with a glass of wine in my hand, I'm pretty good at talking about things. People should tape me then.
Well, thank you. I appreciate your time.
That's all right. You're welcome. Thank you.
I'll be back.